And today we're going to actually take a step outside of my normal world of incident response. My normal world is actually helping organizations respond to and then hopefully recover from an incident. When we talk about incidents in my world, I'm talking about ransomware, I'm talking about business email compromise, advanced persistent threats, and insider threats. All of those types of incidents that you might experience where actually you're out of technical expertise, it might not be an incident you've responded to yourself. With ransomware, we tend to get to that point at the weekend where actually we've been working on an incident all the way through the week. It gets to 5 p.m. on a Friday. Everybody's exhausted and your organization might take that point to actually go, we need to get some backup help. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through actually Unit 42, very, very quickly touch on where I come from, what I do, and what we were actually put in the place of the organization to do. I'm going to take you through a couple of high-level threat insights to be able to say what we're observing on a day-to-day basis, walk you through an incident, how that then corresponds and how we look at then ransomware as a whole, before I'm then going to take you through the battle-tested incident response or incident recovery methodology. And I'm going to share that with you so you can take that back into your organizations. And if you are ever the unfortunate victim of something like a ransomware attack, you can utilize that as a framework to start helping your organization recover. But before we get started, I'm going to ask, has anybody actually dealt with a ransomware attack? There might be one or two in the room. Brilliant. Good stuff. That's actually a real step change, because normally audiences I'm talking to on this topic, they go, nobody's responded to it. No one's ever touched ransomware, which means none of them understand the stress and emotion that Adrian was talking about earlier of actually ransomware recovery. We will focus on ransomware a little bit in this talk, but this isn't only applicable to ransomware. It could be applicable to other incident types. So myself, I'm Jack Hughes, and I'm Director of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at Unit 42. So doing all those great things of helping organizations both understand how a threat actor got into an organization, help them understand exactly what it was that they did whilst they were there, and then help them onto that next stage of improving security maturity and removing them from the organization as a whole. So, Unit 42 was put into the Palo Alto networks to give them threat intelligence. We have this amazingly powerful technology. I'm not going to touch on that very much, but we utilize that technology to give us insights of threat intelligence. We get to look at network telemetry on firewalls, endpoints, and the data we get from EDR agents, and then also looking at cloud surface technologies. And that's great, because what we do then is we take all of that telemetry of the billions of events that we're looking at every day and look at the threat intelligence that we actually have available to us from a telemetry point of view. Threat intelligence team do their wizardry, pull all that together and enable us to then be able to go and take some insights from that. I'm going to talk you through in a second. But selfishly, from the incident response side, and I've got a few members of the team here as well, we get to utilize that threat intelligence to help us really on that right-hand side there to speed up our services from an incident response perspective. So when we go and help organizations, it isn't that we're just going in afresh, that we've never seen this incident type before, we've never seen this threat actor type before. We get to go in knowing who the threat actor is, knowing what it is likely that they do within those organizations, and then we get to utilize that to speed up our response. So what are we seeing? And these stats you can all go and have a read of in the Global Incident Response Report. And I absolutely advocate going and taking a read of it because it's really, really well detailed and well put together. But what we're seeing is that there's a larger number of incidents that are affecting the operations of a business, which is why I want to focus on the recovery today rather than actually the response as a whole. And when we think about business impact, there's lots of different ways that we can address and assess impact or quantify it. But what we're looking at is financial and operational impact. So that being an incident happens, and that's either preventing the organization from operating as a whole, and we'd focus on ransomware, particularly when we see that, and encryption level events. But we also see the financial operations of organizations being impacted. We've seen some statistics today that talk around the total cost of an incident. There's a huge variety of costs, but they do come down to actually the operations of the organization as a whole. What we're also seeing is attacks happening faster. This one's particularly scary as a statistic, because when we think about attacks happening faster, what we're talking about there is threat actor, bad guy, hacker, call them what you want, scanning the internet, looking for opportunities, dropping phishing emails into an organization, and then being successful of getting that initial foothold. They then take that foothold and push it forwards into being able to get within the organization, understand it, and then take action on their objectives. And we're getting into a matter of hours now to take action on objectives. Imagine as a new starter in an organization, I know we've got some extremely technical people in the room, imagine as a new starter in the organization being able to get in and within hours have the privilege to be able to get to the central data stores and exfiltrate it from the environment after having actually worked your way through and understood each step to do that. Well, you as an employee may take days or weeks to understand all the SharePoint sites and Confluence sites and HR data repositories of an organization. Somehow, they're doing it within hours when they get into these organizations. So speed is absolutely something that we're seeing, and they're happening much, much faster. We're also starting to see AI or LLMs or artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence, as I prefer to call it, actually being used as a way of being able to speed up attacks. And what that means, and where we're really seeing this, is helping organization or threat actors target and actually take action on their objectives more quickly. So crafting PowerShell scripts, actually crafting those command line interface parameters that they're passing, and being able to use that as a way of scripting more quickly, and that's where we're really seeing it. On the other side, we're also seeing it being used to create more sophisticated and convincing phishing emails, and that's something, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see. Advice there is continue to do the great work you're doing on phishing education or spear phishing education in your organizations, and continue to use technology to identify and block it where possible. Lastly, and this one's really quite fun, is they are extremely good at using cloud technologies. They're able to get into cloud environments, understand everything that they have access to, and take action on their objectives very, very quickly. We see them having more sophistication in cloud expertise than sometimes the actual cloud providers themselves. As when you have an incident that they experience and you ask the cloud provider, and be it one of those large data centers or large global cloud providers, and you talk to them, well, how did they do this? And they stand there scratching their head. Well, we don't really know. Well, threat actors do, because they're doing it on a day-to-day basis. So these are the things that we're really starting to observe threat actors and the way they're operating. So why are they being successful? Well, there's far too much complexity in organizations, too many individual operating units, too many different technologies being utilized. And technology is the real focus here. There was an IBM survey that recently found there was 83 solutions from 29 vendors in organizations on average. How does a security operations team actually stand a chance of monitoring all of those technologies at one point in time, making sense of the data, making sense of the alerts that are being generated, and then hopefully taking action upon those alerts that are being generated? They don't stand a chance. We're also seeing that we don't have enough visibility. So great that we might have a comprehensive rollout of an EDR technology, and comprehensive would be a nice place for us to be. We don't tend to see that. But we also know from an external facing perspective, how many of you, this would be a great fun question, how many of you would actually put your hands up and confidently say you know exactly is what internet is facing from your organizations today? I've got hands up, that's amazing. It's a really, really difficult thing to do, but understanding shadow IT, actually the way in which cloud technologies are being modified on a day-to-day basis, remote access solutions are being put in place, or even worse, threat actors exposing new assets onto the internet. These are all things that we're seeing. So attack surface visibility is a real challenge. And this last one on cloud. Because cloud is still a new technology, and it's crazy that we're standing here in 2025 and saying cloud is a new technology, and people are still learning how to utilize it, learning how cloud technologies work, this means that the identity and access management solutions, or identity and access management as a whole for those cloud environments, we're going, give it everything, because we don't really know which permission set that it needs to be able to do what we need it to do. And unfortunately, we then give accounts far too much trust as part of it. So if we were to have a think about that, how can we reduce complexity? Absolutely something to focus on, because that will reduce the impact of an incident. If we're able to get more visibility, we've got more chance of responding to an incident. But when I say increasing visibility, that doesn't mean adding more tools to a situation, because adding more tools to a situation increases more complexity. And also, if we can, let's reduce the amount of trust that we're giving to any account within the environment, because we responded to an incident very recently that had 200 domain administrators within the environment. I would suggest that's a few too many. So, we talked about extortion, and we're going to talk about ransomware. And this is quite good fun, because we get to add a new one to this every year. I think the last 2 years we started at 3, when we've gone to 4, and this year, for some reason, we've gone 2025, and it's quintuple extortion now. Encryption level events. So when we think about ransomware, there's 2 things that we tend to be focused on. They are confidentiality and availability, bringing it right back to the simplicity of the CIA triad in information security. When we think about encryption level events, we're thinking about availability. How can an incident reduce the availability of a system? That means that, going back to that point, can we pay people at the end of the month? Are we able to manufacture the parts in our organization? Are we able to service our clients? We're seeing a lot of encryption. We're seeing more data theft. As I mentioned, very quickly, threat actor gets into the environment, is then able to very quickly understand what they have access to and exfiltrate terabytes of data from organizations at a time. We're seeing that data theft is a huge problem and becoming more of a problem than encryption. The threat actors are then utilizing that as a way of extorting and placing pressure on an organization. And they're doing that by placing harassment in place. So sending flowers to the CEO of an organization, reaching out to your own customers, telling them that they have the ransomware has affected the organization, or actually releasing this to the media. Or the best example, releasing it to the regulator that you've been affected by ransomware, are all things that we're seeing in part of harassment claims. We also see, and especially where you don't engage with a threat actor, and I don't suggest that any of you take that upon yourself to go and do if you do have a ransomware attack, but if you do decide to engage with a threat actor, make sure you're doing it in a professional manner, because if you don't, it's very likely they'll come back and try and issue you with a denial of service attack of some sort against probably one of your applications, because they're using it as a way of being able to extort you later down the line. And this latest one that we're seeing quite frequently is where they're taking information or getting access to information that can be used actively on the financial market as a way of being able to extort you, because if they are able to identify and utilize that information in a manner that would reduce your financial pricing on the market, they will look to do that to extort funds from you. Think of a fun situation here where actually data theft occurs and they run it through an LLM and then can start querying that data. What's the most important piece of information in this data set? How could I potentially use this information against the organization? These are all implications of LLMs and how they could be utilized against us. So, and this will make a couple of my team laugh because we're talking about bootloader, but when we think about incidents and the simplicity of how these occur, we'll actually use a phishing email as an example here. And in this case, it's search engine poisoning. In this case, someone was trying to be really useful, trying to find a way of actually conducting a new contracting element. So they were on Google, typing in a very, very specific contracting term. And in doing so, they clicked on a website, downloaded this really useful document that was actually a hidden JavaScript file. When they executed it, it turned out to be bootloader. Now, in doing so, trying to be really useful, they were trying to find this contracting for their organization, they enabled the whole rest of this attack chain. And it comes back to this emotions and the blame, not trying to blame anyone in this case, because there was a lot of technical controls that could have prevented this from happening in the first place. But then this enabled the threat actor very quickly, and I just wanted to step through this quickly, get that reconnaissance in the environment, being able to look at the Cobalt Strike, actually getting it onto the domain controller, be able to use Mimikatz on the domain controller to get use of all of those credentials that they had access to. But also look at the timeline here. We go from June, and I apologize, it's cut off ever so slightly on this screen, but it's fine up there. It goes from the left-hand side saying June all the way through to September. Now, this is actually a really long time, especially for these type of actors to have access to an environment. It's very likely this was an initial access brokerage, so somebody actually got access to the environment and sold that access at a later date before the rest of the attack then continues. For the techies among you, one of the cool things that we did as part of this investigation was to identify the files that had been exfiltrated from the actor. There was a whole lack of logging in this environment, but what was cool is we got hold of the memory and we were able to look at the application execution artifacts in memory and list out all the files that have been touched by free file sync, thus giving a really good indication of the files that had been exfiltrated for that later regulatory piece. But unfortunately, they then continue, actually after exfiltrating the information, and move to ransomware. Now, ransomware is a particularly scary place to be. Because imagine coming into an organization in the morning and suddenly this is what you see across the banks and benches of your organization. Nobody wants to see this, and it's really difficult to be able to move forwards from a ransomware incident. You will very likely not have access to anything in your environment. And so you have to then very quickly identify how you're going to move forwards with the incident. So how do you respond? When we think about incident response and what we want to do, we want to very quickly identify what has happened. What we're looking to identify in that initial piece is firstly the technical facets. What can we not do today as part of our business operation? What are the systems that have been impacted? How many systems have been impacted? Before we then look at the business impact as well. If we're not able to pay our employees, because this has happened on Friday, could be today, just before payroll's being executed across organizations, and you're not able to pay your employees, are they able to go and pay their mortgages next month? Are they able to make their car payments? These are all very real threats of ransomware incidents. Once we've identified that and we can actually start to think of an approach to move forwards, we then move into the investigate phase, which is really understanding how a threat actor got access to the environment and what they were able to do whilst they were there. Now, we think about 4 pillars of information when we're conducting these investigations around network, identity, cloud and application, and endpoint, because that enables us to give a really good visibility of exactly the timeline of the incident as it flowed its way through. Once you've got access to that information, you can then move into this secure or contain and eradicate phase, where you use all of the indicators of compromise, everything you've understood about the incident to really get rid of that threat actor and ensure they can't get back in. We then might want to move to the restore phase, depending on the incident. That's where we're really going to focus today, is on restore and how we get back to operation. But we're going to use all of the information we've gathered there to securely bring ourselves forward into that last phase of lessons learned. And I heard someone mention post-incident review earlier, and I actually really wanted to ask this question. How many of you have ever actually done a post-incident review? That's actually more than I thought I was going to get. I was expecting that to be hands down, to be honest. Actually, effectively performing post-incident reviews is absolutely one of the most important things we can do to take those lessons learned and ensure the incident can't happen again. So, question for you. If you had ransomware in your business tomorrow, what's the first thing that you would do? Hand in your notice, fair. Yeah, could be something you do. Comms, okay. Brilliant. Anything? Sorry? Call me. Yeah. Anything else? Panic.
The reality unexpected alarm's going to go off now is disconnect everything from the internet.
I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, actually, because it depends. That's one of my favourite sayings here. But nobody's going to use the incident response plan. No, because that's buried at the bottom of the drawer. No one's touched it. No one's updated it. And actually, do you even have one in the first place that's comprehensive enough for us to move forwards? And I say this in jest, but we talk about incident response plans a lot. When we've responded to incidents, and all the incidents I've responded to in my time in incident response, I've never come across an organization that actually has and uses an incident response plan. And this either says one of two things. This either says that those organizations that have the incident response plan don't ever call us because they are got it all in hand, or organizations really aren't taking incident response preparedness very seriously. So, as I mentioned, what we're going to focus on is this restoration phase. So we can talk about incidents, how they happen, the kind of technical response to them all day long, but we don't very often get the opportunity to focus on business restoration or actually how we respond to and recover from an incident. So, the first thing we're going to focus on, if we deep dive really into the restoration piece, is what backups do we have? Now, if I come as an incident responder into your organization and you tell me you have tapes, I'm a very happy person because I know I've got something to work from. I know that even if it's in the bottom of your drawer and you've not touched it for a year, you've got a backup of at least some of your systems to work from. They may be out of date. They might not have the latest stock information on them, but they have something. Because if you don't have any backups, it's a much more painful place for us to actually work from and move ourselves forwards. So when we think about backups, we might have on-premise backups, we might have tape servers, we might have backup servers as a whole. Recommendation, if you have backup servers, make sure they're not domain joined, because if they do get access to your network, they will go and delete anything that's on those backup servers. You might have cloud solutions that are being used for backups, and that's great. I'd suggest if you have them, you use them in a hybrid manner. So you've got something on-premise, something in the cloud, and then hopefully you're using a tape backup solution at the same time. How frequently you should do this, it depends on the criticality, and actually threat profiling is a great way to think about the risk and how we think about backup solutions as a whole, because how frequently we back up. If we've got a stock system, it might be that we want to keep a duplicated data storage system so we know exactly the financial records and where they're occurring. It might be it's not quite as important and a daily backup may suffice. All of these things to consider when we're considering backups and how we utilize them. But backups are not always safe. And I'll give you an example. We had an organization that contacted us just before Christmas that wanted assistance in a ransomware incident. Great. We can definitely help them. For one reason or another, they decided that they didn't need our assistance. Absolutely fine. But what they did is they took their backups because they had them. Fantastic. Very happy for them. And they restored them directly back into the environment. And we're happy. 2 weeks of normal business operations, they'd responded successfully to the incident. But what they'd done is they'd actually taken the ransomware environment and restored the threat actor directly back in there. So all of a sudden, the beacon starts going back out to say, this environment's live again. And guess what happened? Well, the threat actor got back into the environment using exactly the same access they had previously. They then went in and found the backups that they'd utilized to restore from and deleted them, and then ransomwared the environment again. So, again, an unfortunate place to be, but absolutely something to focus on. This is where I really want to start focusing. Now, if there are no backups, I will say it's not the end of the world. We have had some really, really good success in being able to go in to an organization that has been affected by ransomware, and we're seeing very frequently, and especially in virtualized environments at the moment, that actually the data isn't all gone. Ransomware tends to be very quick and dirty in its operation. And what we mean by that is it goes in, it executes, but instead of it going and encrypting the entire piece of data, and for those of you who haven't experienced ransomware or in this type of world, if you try and encrypt an entire zip file, as an example, it takes a long time. Even if you've got some real good compute behind it, it takes a long time. So what they do with ransomware is they tend to just focus on the very, very first few headers or very few first pieces of the information in those file stores, because it enables them to say that the information is encrypted. Unfortunately, the way that file systems work, it means that it looks at it and goes, can't use that. We don't really understand what type of file it is. And as such, the ransomware is effective to a means. However, and we'll go a little bit technical for a second, if this happens in a virtualized file system and happens because it encrypts the first part of that virtual disk rather than the entirety of that disk, what it does is it goes, and when we think about NTFS, and we're really going technical for a second, and then we go into a master file table and it only encrypts the very first part of the master file table, well, the great news is there's a backup MFT at the back of the disk, which means that we can utilize the backup MFT, or the MFT mirror, more specifically, if I think about terminology, to then look at the MFT mirror that then tells us where each of the files are located in the virtual disk storage system, meaning we have fantastic success of identifying a way of being able to recover information even when it looks all as lost. I will say, don't rely on that as a way of being able to restore information, because firstly, it might not work, and B, it's not a very quick process. Tapes are still slightly quicker than taking that process, even though tapes are quite slow. So do have a think about that. So when we're considering incident response and thinking about how we respond to these incidents, incident response is a team sport. It's going to require a business-wide approach. We all think of ourselves as the heroes. We all think of ourselves as a way of being able to get into the organization and help them move forwards with pace. And you can, but you can't do it by yourself, because you have to be able to identify what the function is of the business as a whole, especially in the incident. If your business is producing or manufacturing car parts, that is the primary objective, to get that part of the business back online. All the superfluous and other pieces of the business that are maybe not be so necessary, such as, and other parts of the organization will hate us for saying this, there may be IT systems that may not be quite as important. There might be some HR systems, a learning and training platforms, a very nice thing to have, might not be actually the right point to actually focus on getting that back online. So think about the primary objective of the business. What is it that they need to get back online to actually come and continue the operation of the business as a success? And that enables us to then think about the minimal viable solution from an operational perspective to reduce the impact to the business, and then come forward with this go to green plan. And our go to green plan is something that is a little bit of a technical approach, but it means that we then have to start thinking about all of these different technologies and what is it that's most important at that point in time. Now, I put all these words in there because they're all things that people think about. Some organizations will go, Active Directory, got to get our identity sources back online. If we come even a step further back from there, well, actually, if they're using virtual firewalls, are they even able to utilize them? Have they been encrypted? If we come a step back for even further from there, and they're using NTP locally, do they have a time source that they're able to utilize? So really think of the technical constructs of go-to-green planning. And then you start to go all the way and continue about what the planning might be as part of the incident, all of those different systems, and what's the order we need to bring them back online. Cyber recovery planning is something that is really difficult to get right. It takes a long time, but as long as you sit with the organization and you start to think about the business, who are thinking about the objectives of the business, you're going to have to work with the IT team as an incident responder, because they are going to be the ones that are going to be telling you which are the systems that are most important. What have they got available to them? Do they have backups available? Do they have networking available to them at the moment to bring those systems back online? From a HR perspective, we're also then going to be thinking around, are there HR implications of this incident? Actually, are we able to employ our teams at the moment? Are we able to pay them? Are there litigation that might be needed to take it by the legal team as we move our way through? From a finance perspective, are we able to receive money and actually keep ourselves afloat? But are we able to pay our suppliers and continue the supply chain of an organization? And this is why we talk about incident response being a team sport and not just a technical facet, because all of these organizations and all of these parts of the business have to come together for this to be a success. So, I promised you a methodology. So we have a battle-tested incident response methodology that we're going to talk about now that enables us to really move forwards from an incident and ensures that even if we have backups and even if we don't have backups, that we can bring an organization back safely and securely. And that comes from a bit of a heritage of agriculture. And when we think about that, I love some of the shaking heads that are going on in the crowd right now, but when we think about this is called sheep dipping. Now, from an agricultural perspective, what sheep dipping is used for is that sheep out in the field, they tend to get really muddy feet, and over a period of time, they become degraded, they become worn away, and they get mud stuck in there, and they become infected. And so what farmers do is they take a field of sheep, they run them through a sheep dip, very much like this, that contains chemicals, that looks at the feet, and it really attacks them quite nastily. You wouldn't want to dip your own feet in there, that's for sure. And at the other end, they come out very clean. And we apply the same principle as a methodology into incident recovery. And what that enables us to do is take an environment that's post-breach. So a threat actor has had access to the environment and they've been in there, they've performed an attack, be it a ransomware attack, be it an insider threat, whatever it may be, that enables us to take this really dirty field, sheep field as we're talking about it in this sense, and we talk about it in agricultural means, but we're then able to run it through our sheep dip. Now, in our sheep dipping environment, what we're doing is we create a clean environment, or at least a semi-clean environment. That enables us to take these systems through our virtual sheep dip in this means, and we apply security controls, we apply different technologies to this environment to ensure that we take the findings of the investigation and we're able to remove the risk from the environment. And that enables us to move forwards and actually get to a point of a restored environment of pastures new. These bright green fields of actually we know exactly what we've got in the environment and how we're going to utilize it. So, when we think of this as a methodology, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a clean environment. From a create a clean environment, this might be that we create a segregated VLAN. It might be that we create a hypervisor that's very focused on just being used as a sheep dipping process. It may be that we're unplugging physical devices from switches to create that clean environment. And that means that we're also going to remove any interconnectivity between systems, bar it being able to reach out to, and bar not being used in the agricultural sense there, but actually being able to reduce the essence of it being able to connect to any of those other systems and touching them, but we do need to connect to some security technology solutions. To enable us to do that, we're then going to restore any of those systems or backups into that environment. And we're going to do that, as I mentioned, into that environment, but without any connectivity to any of those other systems. We're then going to install security technology or tooling onto those. And that will be EDR technologies, enable us to collect forensic packages from them. We'll go and potentially take log sources from them. But what we're going to do is we're going to put that safety bubble and wrapper around those systems to perform go way back when to an AV scan on those systems or a malware scan. We're going to go and look for any of the indicators of compromise of the incident as a whole, and then we're going to place it into the next step of taking the opportunity of never wasting a crisis and installing those patches that they've been waiting for the last 5 years. From an operating system perspective, from an application perspective, from a security perspective, take this crisis and utilize it to enhance the operation as a whole. So, that enables us to go from this really dirty field of we don't really know what we've got, through the sheep dip of applying all of these security controls, looking for how they've been impacted, ensuring that they are all clean. Because if we do identify anything dirty in there, it gets removed, it gets obliterated, and we get to move afresh. And then we get to move to the devices of the pasture new and of a clean network. They all have up-to-date technologies. They all have actually are now in a state where we can monitor them, and we can move forwards with a matured, improved environment. So, Thing I will note, just moving outside of that environment, and I've added a farmer on here. There's a difference here is we've now got this beautiful, clean environment, but the really important thing, once I've now got all that technology, monitor it and watch it. Because even though we've brought that environment back, we still have to make sure the threat actor doesn't come back and target us again. So the idea of this piece being that we're both going to monitor, we're going to continue to look at the environment in this stage, but we're also going to use it as you never waste that crisis and improve the security operation moving forwards. So, to recap, backups are really, really very important. They're not always the only solution. There are other technical means that we might be able to take to restore or recover an operation. Make sure you are using tapes. And I should have asked the question, but it'd be lovely to know how many of you are using tapes. I know that a lot of organizations are trying to move away from that as an expensive, potentially storage mechanism, but it works. And I really would ask you to take that back to your organizations. It works. It enables us to recover organizations. Make sure we're using that 3-to-1 backup rule of being able to have 3 different backups in 2 different locations and 1 off-site. Absolutely a great way of being able to think about backups. Sheep dipping will provide confidence to an organization because you can literally take a list of systems and have a little RAG status, so red, amber, green status next to it and go, I know exactly at which stage of a sheep dipping process I'm at and whether they're actually prior to the sheep dip, within the sheep dip, or post sheep dip, and now in operations and how they're being utilized. Take time, things will go wrong, not can go wrong, they will go wrong as part of incident recovery. That comes with experience, and unfortunately we have quite a lot of that, in the sense of responding to incidents, not making mistakes. That's not what I'm admitting to here. But it does take time, it will go wrong, but don't waste that crisis. And lastly, please create and test, rehearse and utilize an incident response plan. Because if you have the plan in place, you're effectively rehearsing it. And now, there was a really good comment earlier about law enforcement and the way in which they utilize plans and the way in which they respond to incidents. Think of the Coast Guard. We're actually very fortunate to be down in Devon and we've got the Coast Guard and lifeboats. They go out very frequently to rehearse operations, to be able to go and help people and recover from incidents. We need to be doing the same thing in our industry because if we don't have that muscle memory of responding to incidents, we're very fortunate as an incident response team. We do it every day. A lot of organizations don't do it at all. It may be the first time you've ever responded to an incident. And if you don't have that muscle memory, how can you possibly hope to succeed? Because it goes back to the old memory of fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And I will leave you with that and happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
About 5 minutes.
Yeah, fine.
Any questions?
How many DeepMind credits did you use?
It was Imogen on Google Gemini I was using for the images. Certainly recommend giving that a play. It's good fun.
As an industry, and I think that Terry speaks quite a lot to it, we're failing in incident response planning, and we're certainly failing at exercising it from what I've seen. I've worked with a number of organisations, and every time it's just done badly. I get a lot of pushback you get from organisations is you have to introduce disruption to effectively test an incident response plan. How can we I know it's a very open question, but how can we fix that problem? And what would you recommend what approach would you recommend for that problem, really?
That's a great question. I would challenge whether we need to introduce disruption. And the reason I'd say that is that a well-planned exercise should encompass a threat-informed approach, which says these are the threats that are very likely to occur to our business. It comes back to the threat modeling that we were talking about earlier. As a business, what is it that we're most likely to see? Who are the attackers that are most likely to be targeting us on a day-to-day basis? So that we can then work with actually across the business to understand, if you're doing this as an external perspective, understanding across the business who are the likely stakeholders to be involved in that, to understand what the weaknesses are. So then in an exercise, there's 2 objectives. One is to be able to utilize the incident response plan effectively and find where it's failing, but also to identify and constructively identify those areas for opportunity of improvement across the business more widely. As it may not just be the incident response plan, there's a very, very likely a whole raft of technical things that need to be worked on at the same time. So I wouldn't necessarily say it has to be disruptive. Disruptive is a black swan event as a tabletop exercise or a rehearsal. They can be good fun to participate in from a consulting side, but they are also good fun to respond to as a business as well. But planning and that preparation phase around actually the planning itself is really, really key. If you take the time to actually put together a well-rehearsed and a well-documented and a threat-informed rehearsal, that enables you to then be able to move forwards rather than it just being a cookie cutter. Here's a ransomware attack. How would you respond to this in your business? If it's actually take the time to prepare for that and go, these are the systems that are most likely to be impacted because they're internet facing and they're running really old technologies. If that went offline today, what would we do? And that's what a lot of the plans don't do, is they take this cookie cutter approach and they bring up slides like I've just brought up to say, this is your business today. This is what a ransomware attack looks like. What would you do? It's all very theoretical and it doesn't really work. It's that practical application of what it would look like in your business that I'd look to focus on.
I'm not saying my organisation is perfect, but I was quite surprised by your reaction to, maybe I missed something, but the whole not knowing what you've got publicly exposed. I would have thought that securing your perimeter would be one of the top priorities to, and then like you work in layers effectively, so start from the outside and work your way in. So to me, that's like common sense. I'm quite surprised by your reaction when you said, "Oh, really? I've seen some hands."
I am. Honestly, I was surprised that I saw hands because not only is it thinking about the external assets that you might have exposed, and you go, right, we've got some firewalls, we're exposing technologies or services or actual boxes through the firewall at this point, but are you aware of all of the pieces of application, what software they're running at a single point in time, and actually are they vulnerable? And it's an attack surface management program as a whole that we consider. So I am very surprised, and I've got a couple of the team that are here or a few of the team here today, actually. This is where we spend a lot of our time. Last year, from the Global Incident Response Report, I think it was 36% of incidents were caused by software vulnerabilities on the secure software edge, and be that firewall vulnerabilities, VPN vulnerabilities, web-facing applications. That's where we tend to see the vast majority of those incidents happening. And when you ask the organization, well, were you aware that this was internet facing, or were you aware that it was running a vulnerable piece of software? The answer is more than 50% of the time, no, we weren't aware of that, and we didn't know it was even internet facing. Any other questions? If not, we're around for the rest of the day. Please grab me if you've got any questions, and thank you very much for your time.